Chi possano ammazzariti, tenaglieri all'inferno.
Say that again. Say that again, looking right at me.
Mafia Boss grins as she curses him in Sicilian. Say that again, looking right at me. 6 armed men reached for their weapons the instant she opened her mouth. Nina Castellano had no idea who Vittorio Moretti was. She only knew he'd just backhanded a busboy hard enough to split the kid's lip over a spilled glass of wine in front of an entire dining room. 11 years of carefully controlled silence detonated in 4 seconds. The words came out in rapid, furious Sicilian, a dialect she hadn't spoken since her grandmother's death, calling the most feared man on the eastern seaboard exactly what he was. The restaurant went dead silent. Every soldier at that table braced for their boss to unleash hell. Instead, Vittorio Moretti grinned, a grin nobody at that table had seen from him in over a decade. Subscribe right now and drop your city in the comments, because what Vittorio says next is going to leave you speechless. Like, share, notifications on. You are not ready for this story. Dacera's private dining room carried the specific hushed luxury of a restaurant that existed for exactly one purpose: hosting the kind of business that never appeared on any menu, conducted by men whose names emptied rooms the moment someone recognized them. 6 of Vittorio Moretti's lieutenants sat around the long table, positioned with the specific coiled stillness of soldiers rather than dinner guests, waiting through the monthly sit-down that brought the city's 5 ruling families together under careful, controlled truce. A young busboy moved through the room with a tray of wine glasses, his hands trembling with the specific nervous energy of someone new enough to still be terrified of exactly whose table he was serving. The tray tilted. Red wine spilled across the pristine white tablecloth, splashing onto the sleeve of Vittorio's tailored jacket. The room's temperature seemed to drop instantly. Vittorio's hand moved with sudden, casual violence, an open palm strike catching the boy hard enough across the face to split his lip and send him stumbling backward into the wall behind him. 240-pound night shift waitress with aching ankles and greasy apron strings doesn't expect a billionaire mob boss. She was 3 weeks into her reservation position at Dacera, working her first solo dinner shift after 2 weeks of careful training, standing near the host stand, roughly 15 feet from the private dining room's open archway. She watched the entire exchange unfold in real time. The trembling boy, the spilled wine, the casual, entitled violence that landed with such practiced ease. It clearly wasn't the first time this particular man had struck someone for an accident that barely qualified as an inconvenience. Something in Nina's chest detonated completely. 11 years of carefully controlled silence collapsed in the space of 4 devastating seconds. A specific rage she hadn't allowed herself to fully feel since she was 16 years old, watching her own father's casual cruelty finally drive her mother out the front door for the last time. She crossed the restaurant floor before her conscious mind fully caught up with what her body had already decided. Her voice cut across the dining room, rapid and furious, the words tumbling out in a dialect she hadn't spoken fluently in 11 years. Sicilian, her grandmother's Sicilian, the specific, crude, protective fury of a language reserved exclusively for moments of genuine, uncontrolled rage. Every word landed with visceral, devastating precision, calling Vittorio Moretti exactly what he was, in language crude enough that 2 of his own soldiers actually flinched, their composed expressions cracking with genuine, involuntary discomfort. The restaurant went completely silent. Every armed man at that table reached instinctively toward weapons hidden beneath expensive jackets, their bodies responding to threat assessment before their minds fully processed exactly what kind of threat a reservation hostess in an apron actually represented. Nina stood frozen at the edge of the private dining room, her chest heaving, her Sicilian curse still hanging in the sudden, terrible silence, her rational mind finally catching up to exactly how catastrophically she may have just miscalculated the danger surrounding her. She had absolutely no idea who this man actually was. She only knew, with visceral 11-year-old certainty, exactly what that particular kind of casual violence represented, and exactly how her own grandmother would have responded to witnessing it. Her grandmother had died 11 years earlier, taking with her the last daily reason Nina ever had to speak Sicilian fluently. The two of them had shared that language like a secret code, a private world carved out inside a house that had otherwise felt increasingly unsafe as Nina's father's temper escalated across her teenage years. Her grandmother had used exactly this specific, furious dialect, only in moments of genuine protective rage, standing between Nina and her father's temper more than once, her voice sharp and rapid and utterly fearless, in a language he'd never bothered to learn. Nina hadn't spoken it with that same authentic fury since her mother finally packed a suitcase and left, when Nina was 16, the specific protective language of her childhood becoming something she reserved for quiet kitchen conversations with her younger sister, rather than genuine, uncontrolled emotion. Until tonight, until watching a stranger's casual cruelty resurrect 11 years of buried rage in the space of 4 devastating seconds. Her family's own restaurant had collapsed 18 months earlier, the specific devastating speed of that collapse still carrying weight Nina hadn't fully processed. Debt had appeared seemingly from nowhere, contracts and health inspections and financial obligations spiraling into catastrophe that neither of her parents had ever fully explained before her father simply disappeared entirely, leaving Nina and her younger sister Sophia to navigate the wreckage alone. Sophia's ongoing medical treatment for a chronic condition had become the specific financial pressure driving Nina toward Desera, despite her exhausted, genuine reluctance to work anywhere connected to the restaurant industry that had destroyed her own family. 3 weeks of steady wages had felt like the first genuine stability she'd found in over a year. Now, standing frozen in the private dining room's archway with 6 armed men watching her with genuine, growing alarm, Nina understood with devastating clarity exactly how quickly that stability might collapse entirely. Vittorio Moretti's controlled expression shifted through something Nina couldn't immediately interpret. He was 38, composed in the specific way of a man whose absolute authority had kept 5 rival families in careful order for over a decade. His reputation for controlled violence considerable enough that grown men in expensive suits stopped talking mid-sentence when his name entered conversation. His own men had never once witnessed his careful, controlled composure crack in front of witnesses. They watched it crack now. Something raw and unguarded moved behind his dark eyes as Nina's furious Sicilian continued echoing in the sudden silence, his own 15-year buried memory crashing back with visceral, overwhelming force. His grandmother. Standing between him and his violent father, with exactly that same rapid, protective fury, speaking exactly that same dialect, the specific, unconditional love that had represented the only genuine safety Vittorio ever experienced before her death, 15 years earlier, left him permanently alone with violence he eventually learned to control through absolute, careful power, rather than escape it. 15 years, and he hadn't heard anyone speak Sicilian with that exact authentic protective rage since. Marco Delgado, Vittorio's longtime consigliere, watched his boss's expression shift with genuine, growing alarm, his own careful composure carrying none of the controlled confidence that typically defined his presence at these monthly gatherings. Something in Marco's own eyes carried considerably more complicated weight than simple concern for organizational optics, though nobody else at that table noticed the specific difference. Every soldier around that table braced for violent retaliation, understanding intuitively that public humiliation delivered by a stranger in front of witnesses during a sensitive diplomatic gathering with rival families represented exactly the kind of insult their boss's reputation absolutely required him to answer decisively. Instead, Vittorio Moretti grinned, genuine and unguarded, spreading slowly across his controlled features in a way none of his own men had witnessed from him in over a decade of absolute, careful authority. The specific, devastating warmth of that expression carried none of the predatory calculation everyone in that room had braced themselves to witness. Nina's own fury faltered slightly, genuine confusion beginning to replace her defensive rage as she processed exactly how badly her expectations had just been upended. The silence stretched, thick and unbearable. Every witness in that private dining room waiting for their boss's actual response, his controlled expression carrying something considerably more vulnerable than the absolute authority that had built his entire empire. Then Vittorio spoke, his voice carrying genuine, devastating quiet that somehow filled the entire silent restaurant despite its softness. "Say that again." His eyes held Nina's with unwavering, unguarded intensity, looking right at me. Nina's fury faltered into genuine, disorienting confusion, her braced expectation of violent retaliation shattering completely against Vittorio's unexpected, unguarded request. Her professional composure cracked visibly, the specific paralyzing realization crashing over her that whatever she'd just triggered was considerably more complicated than simple public humiliation demanding immediate consequence. Marco Delgado's own controlled alarm rippled through the assembled lieutenants, genuine confusion crossing every face at that table as their boss's absolute, careful composure visibly cracked in front of witnesses for the first time in over a decade of controlled authority. "Boss." One soldier's voice carried genuine, uncertain concern, his hand still hovering near his jacket. Vittorio's raised palm silenced him instantly, his eyes never once leaving Nina's face. "My grandmother used to speak exactly like that." His voice carried genuine, unguarded weight that filled the silent restaurant despite its quiet register. "I haven't heard that dialect used with real fury in 15 years. Nina's own composure shifted from defensive fear into genuine, growing confusion as she processed the specific vulnerability crossing the face of a man his own soldiers clearly regarded with absolute, controlled terror. "I don't know who you are." Her voice carried genuine, careful caution despite her racing pulse. "I don't care who you are. What you did to that boy was... I know exactly what I did." Vittorio's voice cut through her protest with quiet, devastating honesty. "And I know exactly what you just called me for doing it." Nina's hands curled at her sides, her fear beginning to give way to something considerably more complicated as she studied his genuine, unreadable expression. "Then why are you smiling?" Vittorio rose slowly from his chair, his movements carrying none of the predatory calculation his soldiers had braced themselves to witness, crossing the distance between them with careful, deliberate steps. "Because I haven't heard anyone speak to me with that specific fury in 15 years. His voice dropped lower, carrying genuine, unguarded vulnerability. "Not since my grandmother died." Nina studied him carefully, genuine curiosity beginning to override her instinctive caution, despite every warning her body was still transmitting about the obvious danger surrounding this exact conversation. "Where did you learn that specific dialect?" His question carried genuine, careful interest. "My grandmother taught me." Nina's voice remained guarded despite her growing confusion. "She died 11 years ago." Vittorio's expression shifted through something devastating, genuine recognition crossing his controlled features. "Where was she from, specifically?" Nina's hesitation carried genuine, growing wariness. "A small village outside Palermo." "Why does that matter to you?" Vittorio went completely still, something raw and unguarded moving behind his controlled expression. "Because my own family traces back to that exact same region." The restaurant's silence deepened around them, every soldier at that table watching this unprecedented exchange with genuine, growing confusion, understanding intuitively they were witnessing something none of them had context to fully process. Nina's own guarded caution began shifting into genuine curiosity, despite her lingering fear, the specific improbable coincidence carrying weight she couldn't immediately dismiss. That doesn't explain why you're smiling after I just cursed you in front of your own men. Vittorio's genuine, unguarded expression carried something considerably more vulnerable than the absolute authority his reputation demanded. My father was violent. His voice carried genuine, devastating honesty that clearly startled every soldier listening. My grandmother stood between us more times than I can count, speaking exactly that same furious dialect, protecting me the only way she knew how. Nina's own composure cracked slightly, genuine recognition of shared trauma, bridging the impossible gap between a reservation hostess and the most feared crime boss on the eastern seaboard. She died when I was 23. Vittorio's voice carried genuine, unguarded grief beneath its controlled surface. 15 years ago, I haven't heard anyone speak that language with authentic fury since. Nina studied him for a long, devastating moment, her own 11 years of buried grief resurfacing alongside genuine, complicated empathy she hadn't expected to feel toward the man she'd just publicly humiliated. That still doesn't excuse what you did to that boy. Her voice carried renewed, steady conviction despite everything shifting between them. No. Vittorio's genuine, controlled agreement carried none of the defensive anger she might have expected. It doesn't. He turned toward the busboy still standing near the wall, his split lip trembling as he processed the surreal scene unfolding in front of him. Get him proper medical attention, immediately. And ensure he receives compensation for tonight considerably beyond his usual wages. The boy's shocked expression mirrored the genuine confusion radiating from every soldier at that table, none of them accustomed to witnessing their boss's controlled authority pivot so completely in response to a stranger's fury. Nina watched this unexpected response with genuine, growing confusion of her own, her carefully maintained defensive posture beginning to soften despite every instinct warning her against exactly that vulnerability. Marco Delgado's own careful, controlled observation of this unprecedented exchange carried genuine alarm beneath his composed exterior, his eyes tracking every detail with the specific, calculating attention of a man processing considerably more dangerous implications than his relaxed posture suggested. "What's your name?" Vittorio's question carried genuine, careful interest that felt considerably different from the predatory calculation Nina had braced herself against. She hesitated, every rational instinct warning her against providing personal information to a man whose reputation clearly commanded genuine, absolute fear from hardened criminals. But something in his genuine vulnerability, something in the shared recognition of exactly what that specific dialect represented for both of them, made her answer despite her lingering caution. Nina. Her voice carried careful, guarded honesty. Nina Castellano. The specific reaction that name produced carried devastating weight nobody else in that room registered, except one person. Marco Delgado's composed expression cracked almost imperceptibly, his careful, practiced control faltering for exactly one devastating second before he forced his features back into neutral stillness. Nobody noticed except the specific flicker of genuine, private dread crossing his eyes, understanding with growing, controlled horror exactly what family history that particular surname might eventually connect back towards secrets he'd spent 15 years successfully, carefully protecting from exactly this kind of unexpected collision. Vittorio's own attention remained entirely focused on Nina, genuine warmth replacing his earlier controlled authority, as he processed her name with none of the recognition currently radiating from his consigliere, seated several feet away. Castellano. His voice carried genuine, quiet consideration. "I'd like to know more about your family, Nina Castellano, if you're willing to share it." Nina studied him carefully, genuine confusion warring against the specific, inexplicable pull she felt toward continuing this conversation, despite every reasonable instinct telling her to walk away immediately. "Why would that matter to you?" Vittorio's genuine, unguarded expression carried weight considerably beyond simple curiosity. Because I haven't felt anything close to what I'm feeling right now in 15 years, and I'd like to understand exactly why that is. Vittorio's genuine, growing investment in understanding Nina extended considerably beyond simple fascination. Within days of their initial encounter, his own resources applied methodically toward learning everything about her family's history. His financial team began the comprehensive review that first night, cross-referencing property records and business filings connected to any restaurant bearing the Castellano name across the city's registry. What they discovered carried immediate, devastating significance. Vittorio reviewed the assembled findings personally, genuine controlled fury building with each additional document his team presented. "Show me everything." His voice carried absolute, focused authority as his lead investigator laid out comprehensive financial records across his private studies desk. The pattern that emerged carried specific, devastating precision. Supplier contracts mysteriously cancelled within the same 3-month window, health inspection violations appearing from nowhere, citations that matched no genuine operational failures the restaurant's previous records demonstrated. A targeted debt structure, coordinated with timing too precise to represent ordinary, unfortunate business misfortune. This isn't bad luck. Vittorio's controlled fury sharpened into something considerably more dangerous as he processed the comprehensive documentation. This is systematic destruction. His investigator's expression carried genuine, professional confirmation. "Someone deliberately targeted this specific restaurant, sir. The coordination required across multiple sectors, suppliers, inspectors, financial institutions, suggests considerable resources and considerable planning." Vittorio's mind raced through the specific devastating timeline, his own memory of his grandmother's death 15 years earlier, colliding against the exact period this systematic sabotage appeared to have originated. Pull everything connected to family properties from that same era, 15 years back specifically. His voice carried genuine, growing dread. "I need to understand if this connects to anything my own family held during that period." The investigation deepened over the following days. Vittorio's genuine growing investment, extending beyond simple curiosity into methodical, comprehensive understanding of exactly what conspiracy might connect his own devastating family history to Nina's destroyed restaurant. Nina herself remained genuinely guarded throughout those same days, her own instinctive caution warring against the specific practical necessity Sophia's continued medical treatment demanded. "I don't understand why you're doing any of this." Her voice carried genuine, guarded confusion during a careful conversation with Vittorio at his private estate, several days after their initial confrontation. "You don't owe my family anything." Vittorio's expression carried genuine, complicated honesty. "I'm not entirely certain that's true anymore." His careful explanation of the systematic sabotage his investigation had uncovered landed with devastating weight, Nina's own composure cracking as she processed exactly how deliberately her family's destruction had been orchestrated. "Someone did this on purpose." Her voice carried genuine, growing horror. "For 18 months, I believed my father simply made terrible decisions, that we lost everything because of his own failures." Vittorio's controlled fury carried genuine protective weight. "Your father may have made mistakes, but this specific pattern of destruction required resources and coordination he never possessed. Someone deliberately targeted your family, and I intend to understand exactly why." Nina's own guarded willingness to trust Vittorio's involvement deepened despite her lingering instinctive caution, Sophia's continued medical needs providing genuine, practical motivation to accept whatever resources and protection his growing investment offered. Detective Elena Vasquez arrived at Vittorio's estate 3 days later, her own parallel financial crimes investigation into systematic small business sabotage throughout the city, intersecting directly with his private inquiry. I've been tracking a pattern across 17 different small businesses over the past 2 years. Her voice carried genuine professional gravity during their initial meeting. Coordinated financial destruction, always targeting family-owned establishments, always with the specific precision suggesting inside knowledge of exactly how to inflict maximum damage while maintaining plausible deniability. Vittorio's expression sharpened with immediate, focused attention. You believe this connects to organized crime involvement? Elena's voice carried genuine, careful certainty. I believe this connects to someone with considerable resources and considerable patience, someone protecting something valuable enough to justify systematically destroying innocent families across nearly 2 decades. Their combined investigation accelerated with devastating momentum over the following week, Elena's institutional authority providing crucial legal framework, alongside Vittorio's own organization's considerable investigative resources. The comprehensive evidence that assembled carried genuine, devastating implications neither had fully anticipated. Financial records traced directly back to property holdings connected to Vittorio's own grandmother, land she'd owned outright before her death 15 years earlier, property that had mysteriously transferred through a complex series of shell transactions immediately following her passing. Vittorio reviewed the documentation with growing, horrified recognition. This is my grandmother's property. His voice carried genuine, controlled devastation. The land she left specifically to my father's estate. I never questioned what happened to it after her death. Elena's expression carried genuine, professional focus as she cross-referenced additional records. Someone quietly, illegally acquired this property through manipulation shortly after her death, and Nina's family's original restaurant location sat directly adjacent to a boundary dispute connected to this exact same parcel 18 months ago. Vittorio's controlled fury crystallized into devastating, absolute certainty. Nina's family accidentally threatened to expose something through an unrelated property matter. His voice carried genuine, growing horror, and someone eliminated that threat by destroying their entire livelihood rather than risk exposure. Elena's careful investigation into the specific chain of ownership behind the illegal transfer produced the final, devastating piece of evidence, a signature and authorization trail leading directly back to someone whose position within Vittorio's own organization provided exactly the access needed to orchestrate both the original theft and its subsequent protection. Marco Delgado. Vittorio's voice carried genuine, absolute devastation as he processed the name attached to the documentation. My own consigliere, my most trusted advisor for over a decade. The comprehensive scope of the betrayal crystallized with terrible, devastating clarity. Marco had quietly, illegally acquired Vittorio's grandmother's property 15 years earlier, immediately following her death, exploiting his position of absolute trust to manipulate the transfer, without Vittorio ever suspecting involvement throughout an entire decade and a half. Nina's family's original restaurant, unknowingly and entirely by accident, had threatened to expose that 15-year-old theft through a routine property boundary dispute 18 months earlier. Marco's response had been systematic, comprehensive destruction, rather than risk any investigation that might eventually trace back toward his original crime. Vittorio's controlled fury carried genuine, devastating weight as the full picture assembled itself. He destroyed an innocent family's entire livelihood to protect 15 years of theft from my own inheritance. His voice carried absolute, dangerous certainty, and now Nina's connection to me has brought exactly the scrutiny he spent 15 years successfully avoiding. Elena's expression carried genuine, urgent alarm. If Marco understands his exposure has become unavoidable, he's not simply going to accept consequence quietly. Men who've protected secrets this significant for this long typically become considerably more dangerous once cornered. Vittorio's phone buzzed suddenly with an urgent security alert. his expression shifting instantly from devastated recognition into sharp, focused alarm as he reviewed the incoming message. Marcos left the estate without authorization. His voice carried genuine, growing dread, and surveillance just confirmed he's coordinating movement toward Nina's current location. Vittorio's response carried none of his usual controlled composure, the specific raw urgency of a man understanding his own most trusted advisor's 15-year betrayal had placed Nina directly in mortal danger. Full mobilization. Now. His voice carried absolute, unshakable command as his security team activated within minutes, every available resource converging toward Nina's location with devastating speed. Elena Vasquez's own federal authority mobilized simultaneously, her institutional resources combining with Vittorio's private security in an unprecedented, urgent alliance neither had anticipated needing days earlier. "I want agents positioned at every possible approach." Her voice carried genuine professional urgency as she coordinated with Vittorio's own security chief. If Marco understands the full scope of his exposure, he's not going to move carelessly. Nina, unaware of the rapidly escalating danger, remained at her small apartment preparing dinner for Sofia, her mind still processing the devastating revelations Vittorio had shared about her family's systematic destruction. A knock at her door carried nothing unusual at first, Nina's instincts registering only mild surprise at an unexpected visitor rather than genuine alarm. She opened it to find Marco Delgado standing in her hallway, his controlled composure carrying none of the polished authority she'd witnessed during their brief encounter at Desera. "Miss Castellano." His voice carried practiced, careful warmth that failed to fully mask genuine underlying tension. "I wonder if I might have a moment of your time." Nina's instincts sharpened immediately, her own growing understanding of exactly who this man represented within Vittorio's organization, triggering genuine, careful caution. "I don't think that's appropriate right now." Marco's expression shifted subtly, genuine desperation beginning to bleed through his carefully maintained composure. "I'm afraid I must insist." Before Nina could respond, Vittorio's security team arrived with devastating, coordinated speed, their controlled approach intercepting Marco's position before he could force his way further into the building. Marco's genuine panic finally broke through completely as he processed exactly how thoroughly his desperate operation had already failed. "You don't understand what you're interfering with." His voice carried raw, desperate fury as security personnel secured his position. 15 years of careful protection, and it's ending because of a woman who should have simply stayed in her own world. Vittorio arrived moments later, his controlled fury carrying the full devastating weight of 15 years of misplaced trust, finally colliding with absolute betrayal. "Marco." His voice carried none of the warmth their decade-long partnership had once contained. "You destroyed an innocent family to protect theft from my own inheritance." Marco's composure shattered completely, genuine, desperate justification bleeding through his final attempts at maintaining control. "I built half of what you inherited. 240-pound night shift waitress with aching ankles and greasy apron strings. Doesn't expect a billionaire mob boss." The confrontation carried the specific brutal finality Vittorio's world absolutely demanded. Marco's 15-year betrayal and his systematic destruction of Nina's family, finally, comprehensively answered for, through consequence neither private authority nor federal prosecution alone could have achieved independently. Elena's federal team secured comprehensive evidence throughout Marco's estate that same evening, financial records and property documentation providing airtight proof of exactly how systematically he'd orchestrated both the original theft and the subsequent destruction of Nina's family's livelihood. Weeks passed following that devastating confrontation, Marco facing comprehensive federal prosecution for financial fraud and systematic business sabotage, evidence too extensive for any legal maneuvering to minimize the consequences awaiting him. Nina's family restaurant began comprehensive restoration under resources Vittorio insisted on providing, not as romantic gesture, but as genuine, overdue justice for 15 years of theft that had predated her family's suffering entirely. "I don't know how to properly thank you for any of this." Nina's voice carried genuine, overwhelmed gratitude during a quiet conversation weeks after Marco's arrest. Vittorio's expression carried genuine, unguarded warmth. "You already gave me something I hadn't felt in 15 years the moment you cursed me in Sicilian. Everything since has simply been ensuring that courage never cost you anything you didn't choose to give." Sofia's ongoing medical treatment received permanent security through trust funds, carrying no strings attached, beyond genuine accountability for what Marco's conspiracy had stolen from their entire family's future. The specific, comprehensive justice finally reaching a family who'd spent 18 months believing their devastation was simply bad luck, rather than deliberate, calculated destruction. Vittorio's own reckoning with 15 years of trusting Marco completely evolved into genuine, careful reconsideration of everything he'd built his empire around, his organization undergoing quiet, significant restructuring as he understood some rules and structures existed simply to protect convenient blindness rather than genuine organizational wisdom. His relationship with Nina developed slowly, deliberately, neither of them rushing toward assuming that shared crisis automatically created connection across the specific, genuine divide between her legitimate world and his considerably more dangerous one. Months later, Nina stood behind the counter of her family's fully restored restaurant on an ordinary evening, the specific warm hum of a genuinely thriving business filling space that had once carried nothing but devastating financial ruin. Sofia worked beside her in the kitchen, the two sisters exchanging rapid, joyful Sicilian across the counter, with none of the guarded caution that dialect had once required, their grandmother's protective language now carrying genuine, uncomplicated warmth rather than buried grief. Vittorio sat at a corner table, watching the exchange with genuine, unguarded warmth, his presence carrying none of the danger or urgency that had defined their first devastating encounter months earlier. Just present, simply choosing exactly where he wanted to be. "You're staring again." Nina's voice carried genuine, teasing warmth as she crossed toward his table with a plate of fresh pasta. Vittorio's answering smile carried genuine, unguarded happiness. "I haven't stopped staring since the night you cursed me in front of 6 armed men." Nina settled into the chair across from him, genuine peace replacing the guarded exhaustion that had once defined every interaction throughout her family's devastating collapse. "My grandmother would have liked you." Her voice carried genuine, quiet certainty. Despite everything, Vittorio's expression carried genuine, complicated warmth. "I like to think mine would have approved of you too. 15 years of silence, and you're the one who finally brought that dialect back into my life, with real fury behind it." Nina reached across the table, her fingers finding his with genuine, deliberate tenderness. "Maybe that's exactly what both our grandmothers were protecting us for. This exact moment." The restaurant around them carried none of the devastation that had once defined its collapse, filled instead with genuine warmth, rebuilt family, and the specific, quiet miracle of two people who'd found each other through devastating crisis and chosen, deliberately, to build something real from everything that remained once justice finally, comprehensively arrived. If this story kept you holding your breath from that furious Sicilian curse to this final quiet evening, if it reminded you that sometimes the fiercest love comes from the languages we carry from the people who protected us, subscribe right now because we are not finished.